Montana Territory, 1878. The wind ran wild across the plains when Teagan Vaughn was thrown from the only place she had left to call home. "You are too weak to work, Teagan," Abel Dorset said flatly, not looking her in the eyes. "I cannot afford to feed someone who cannot pull her weight." Teagan's fingers gripped the worn strap of her satchel. Her arms trembled from the weight, but she said nothing. She would not beg, not again. "You have until sunset," Abel added, already turning back toward the barn. The same barn where she had spent the last 3 years mending tack, feeding stock, and nursing sick calves through winter storms. Until her lungs gave out, Teagan walked away before the tears could rise. She did not want that man seeing her break. Her breath caught shallow and sharp as it had ever since the fever 2 months back. She could barely carry a pail now, and once the coughing started, it did not stop. She had tried to hide it, but Abel was looking for a reason. She had no kin, no husband, no strength left to argue. By dusk, she was alone on the trail with nothing but that satchel, her mother's Bible, and a thin wool shawl. Her chest burned with every step. She kept walking. 2 nights later, the wind howled through the Bitterroot foothills, and Teagan collapsed near a dry creek bed, her breath too tight to pull. The world spun. She curled against a boulder, arms wrapped around herself. If this was where she would die, then so be it. But then horse hooves. A low whistle. Someone dismounted. She could not lift her head. A warm hand touched her cheek. "Hey," a voice said, low and careful. "You still breathing?" Teagan blinked, and the face above her blurred, rough jaw, sunburned skin, eyes the color of dark pine. His hat was pushed back, his hair curling at the nape. He looked young, near her age, maybe a little older, but there was something solid in his voice. "I have got you," he said. She tried to push him off. Her pride flared even now. "Leave me, I am not worth the trouble." The man did not move. He pulled one blanket from his pack, then another. "That is not your call to make." She passed out before she could argue again. When Teagan woke, it was morning and she was wrapped in warmth blankets, a fire, and the scent of coffee and ash. Her chest still ached, but she was breathing. The cowboy sat nearby, sharpening his knife on a flat stone. His shirt was dusted with trail dirt, and there was a scar across his left hand. He looked up when she stirred. "Morning," he said. "You are lucky I came down the ridge last night. This spot gets cold after dark." Teagan pushed herself upright slowly. "You should not have stopped." "Well, I did." He poured coffee and handed her the tin cup. "Name is Quince Zamora. I was headed east, but I can make time." Teagan hesitated. Then, "Teagan Vaughn," he nodded once. "So, Teagan Vaughn, you want to tell me what you were doing out here near dead with no horse, no fire, and no food?" She sipped the coffee, even though it hurt. "Got thrown off a ranch, said I was too weak to work." Quince looked at her for a long second. "You sick?" "Got a lung fever 2 months back. I am still breathing, but not strong enough to do a full day's work." He leaned back, arms crossed. "That ain't a crime." "It is when you are a woman alone and living off someone else's land." Quince did not ask more. He just stood and packed his things. Then he pointed to his horse. "You are riding with me." Teagan's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because you need help, and I am not one to leave someone behind. I do not need saving." He smiled faintly. "Good, I am not offering that. I am offering a ride and some hot food." She looked at the horse, then at him. Her legs shook when she stood. He caught her before she could fall, one arm firm around her waist. "You do not have to carry me," she muttered. "Not yet," he said, lifting her up into the saddle like she weighed nothing. "But I will if it comes to it." They rode for hours. Teagan leaned into him more than she wanted to admit. His arms did not waver. He rode steady, one hand loose on the reins, the other wrapped around her waist. By the time they stopped near a river bend, her head was on his shoulder. He helped her down gently. "I have a line shack a few miles from here. Belongs to my cousin. No one is using it." "You do not even know me," she said softly. Quince met her gaze. "I know enough. I know you have the kind of fight in you most folks never find. I know you have been through hell and you are still standing." She turned away. Her face flushed. He made stew over the fire and they ate in silence. When the stars came out, she sat beside him, knees pulled to her chest. "Thank you," she said after a long while. Quince looked over. "For what?" "For not asking too many questions. I figured you would tell me what you wanted when you wanted." Teagan nodded. "That is fair." They sat quiet again. Then she asked, "Why are you alone out here?" He stirred the coals. "Used to ride with a cattle crew, drifter work. I got tired of following someone else's orders, bought a few acres out near Deer Lodge, been fixing up the place. It is small, but mine." She looked at him then, really looked. "You built your own place, mostly with my hands, some help from kin. It is not much, but it is warm in winter." Teagan felt something shift in her chest, not pain, not fear, something lighter. "You going back there?" she asked. Quince nodded. "Tomorrow." "You are coming with me." She stared at him, startled. He added, "Only if you want to." She did not answer right away. But when he laid his bedroll beside hers that night, she let herself fall asleep knowing he was there, steady and quiet, just a few feet away. The next day they rode toward the homestead. Teagan's fever had broken. Her body still ached, but she could breathe easier. The land opened wide in front of them, pine-covered hills, slow rivers, and sky that never ended. When they reached the cabin, it was rough but solid. A porch with a rocking chair, smokehouse out back, a lean-to stable. "This is it," Quince said. Teagan stepped down, slow but steady. She touched the porch rail. "It is beautiful." He watched her, then said, "You do not owe me anything, Teagan. You can stay a day, a week, whatever you need." "No strings," she looked up at him. "And if I wanted to help earn my keep," he smiled. "Then we will figure that out together," she nodded. And for the first time in weeks, her feet did not feel so shaky. Inside, he showed her the kitchen and the loft. She took the smaller bed without protest. As she unpacked her satchel, she found the Bible again, worn and soft from years of use. Outside, Quince chopped wood, the steady rhythm echoing through the trees. Teagan watched from the window, her fingers tight around the sill. She was not healed yet. But maybe she had found a place where she could. And maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who would carry her burdens, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, and that made all the difference. The cabin settled into quiet as the days shortened. Frost rimmed the grass most mornings, and Teagan's breath came in soft clouds when she stepped outside. She moved slower than she used to, but the worst of the tightness in her chest had eased. Her hands still trembled if she tried to carry too much at once, so she didn't. Not yet. Quince never asked her to. One afternoon, while he was repairing a broken fence rail, she brought him a tin cup filled with warm cider. He took it without fuss, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist. "You always this quiet?" she asked, leaning one shoulder against the post. He took a long drink before answering. "Only when I got someone worth listening to." She let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "That's a fine way of turning the question back around. You answered it just now," he said, setting the cup down near his tools. "You don't like silence much." "I used to, before." Quince waited, not pushing. She looked out toward the tree line where the pines stood tall and dark. "I was the youngest daughter, the only one who stayed when the rest left. After the war ended, Papa couldn't hold onto the land. Ma passed before the first frost. The ranch where I ended up, it wasn't kind." He didn't speak, just stepped closer and handed her one of the wooden pegs he'd carved for the fence. She turned it over in her fingers. "What about you?" she asked. "You picked this place because it's far or because it's yours?" He leaned against the rail beside her. "I was born just outside of Las Vegas, New Mexico territory. My father ran freight wagons. My mother didn't speak English till I was near grown. After he died, we moved north to be near her people in Helena. I never stayed long anywhere." "You got kin still?" she asked. "A few cousins. We trade letters. Once in a while one of them drops by, but mostly it's just me." Teagan nodded once, then hesitated. "You ever get tired of being alone?" "Sometimes," he said. "Then I remember most noise ain't worth the cost." Her fingers tightened around the peg. "I used to think if I worked hard enough, someone would see me as more than a burden. Turns out I was easier to forget." Quince picked up the mallet and drove the peg into place with one solid strike. "Then they weren't worth remembering." That night, rain came steady and cold. Quince moved his bedroll from the loft to the hearth without explaining why. Teagan didn't ask. She lay above, listening to the logs crack and settle, the steady rhythm of his breathing below. By morning, the earth had turned to mud. The path to the chicken coop was slick, and when Teagan slipped, her hands landed hard in the muck. She sat there a moment, breath caught in frustration before pushing herself up. Quince was already at the top of the path, a basket under one arm. "You all right? I'm not made of porcelain." "No," he said, offering her a hand, "but you're not made of stone either." She let him pull her up. His hand was warm, calloused, and didn't let go right away. She didn't mind. Inside, she peeled off her wet stockings and sat near the stove. Quince knelt to stoke the fire. "You ever think about leaving here?" she asked. "Not lately. If you did," he looked over his shoulder. "That depend on if someone was going with me." Teagan felt something sharp and unfamiliar twist low in her belly. She busied herself with the kettle, pouring water into the tin basin to scrub her hands clean. That evening, with the rain still tapping at the roof, she stitched a torn hem on one of Quince's shirts. Her fingers moved slower than they once had, the needle tugging through worn cotton with effort. Quince sat across from her, carving a spoon from willow. "I can't do much yet," she said. "But I can mend." "You don't owe me anything," he said without looking up. "I know, that's why I want to." He set down the spoon and rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm used to doing things on my own." "So am I," she said, "but I'm tired of it." He looked at her then, long and steady. Whatever had settled quiet between them began to shift, just a little. "You think you'll stay?" he asked. "I don't know yet." "That's fair." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It held space. When she stood to go up to the loft, she paused at the foot of the ladder. "Quince?" "Yeah, if I do stay. I want to learn how to do more than mend. I want to build." He nodded once, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "Then I'll teach you." She climbed the ladder slowly, her knees still weak but her spine straight. The wind outside had softened. The fire was the only light left. Down below, Quince stretched out near it, one hand resting across his chest. She watched him for a long while through the slats of the loft floor. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like something someone had left behind. The first snow fell before the chickens stopped laying. Teagan woke to the hush of it. The world outside the window softened in white. She eased herself from the loft, her feet bare against the cold floorboards. Quince had already lit the stove, and the scent of cornmeal and lard hung in the air. "You're early," she said, pulling the shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I heard the wind change last night," he said, not turning from the skillet. "Figured it had come with snow." She watched him flip the cakes with the edge of a knife. He moved like someone who'd learned to make do without complaint. "I can cook," she offered, "if you show me where everything is." He handed her the wooden spoon. "Then let's start with warming up the beans." She didn't ask if he was sure. He wouldn't have offered if he wasn't. The snow kept them in the cabin that day. Teagan rolled dough for flatbread while Quince carved a new handle for the drawknife. They didn't speak much, but the quiet wasn't empty. It carried the weight of two people learning to share space without stepping on each other's corners. That afternoon, Quince pulled a pine plank from the pile behind the stove and set it across two stools. "For what?" she asked, brushing flour from her fingers. "Thought you might want a place to sit, and so that ain't your lap," he said. "Or write if you do that." She ran her hand across the grain. "I used to, letters mostly, never had anyone to write to after a while," he shrugged. "You could write to yourself." Teagan raised an eyebrow. "That's something you do?" "No," he said. "But maybe I should have." She brought the needlework to the new table and sat while he returned to his tools. Outside, the snow deepened, and the trees bowed under its weight. By evening, she had stitched one corner of a quilt top from old scraps she'd found in a trunk. When she held it up to the lamplight, Quince leaned over her shoulder. "You plan all that, or just fit the pieces where they fell?" Teagan smiled faintly. "Little of both," he nodded slowly. "That's about how a good life gets made, I think." The next morning, they hitched the mare to the sled and rode down to the creek. Ice had gathered along the banks, but the water still moved beneath. Teagan stayed wrapped in the wool blanket, her boots tucked under the seat rail. "You always live this far from town?" she asked as they waited for the mare to drink. "Far enough to hear myself think," he said. "Close enough to trade when I have to. You go often, couple times a month. I get flour, salt, coffee." "Sometimes I pick up news, but most of it's not worth the trouble." She watched the trees sway above them. "I wouldn't mind seeing it if you go again." He glanced at her, then nodded. "You'd need good boots and a scarf." "I've got extra wool if you want to sew one." Back at the cabin, she found the wool tucked in a chest beside old traps and a coil of rope. She ran her hand over the thick weave, then brought it to the table and set to cutting. That evening, while she stitched, Quince brought in a box of old tools he'd traded for before settling here. He set them down beside the hearth. "If you want to learn to build," he said, "you'll need to know how to care for these." She looked at the rusted planes and dented hammers. "They've seen better days. So have most things worth keeping," he said, crouching beside her. "But they still work if you know how to sharpen them." She nodded, quiet but certain. "Then I'll learn." He offered her a piece of oiled cloth and showed her how to clean the metal. She worked alongside him, sleeves rolled back, fingers stained with grease. Later, when they sat with their backs to the fire, Teagan leaned her head against the edge of the chair, watching the flicker of light dance across the wood walls. "You ever think about what it'd be like to have someone stay?" she asked. Quince didn't answer right away. He rested his elbows on his knees, gaze fixed on the coals. "Sometimes," he said. "Used to figure I wasn't made for it. Never knew when to speak and when to hold still." "You've done fine so far," he looked over. "Only because you don't mind the stillness." "I think I need it after everything," she said, "but it's not the same alone." His voice dropped low. "It doesn't have to be." She didn't move, but her breath caught just once. Then she let it out slow. "I want to stay, Quince. Not because I owe you, because I choose to." He met her eyes, nothing rushed or uncertain in the way he looked at her. "Then I'll make room for you." "In everything?" She reached for his hand, fingers threading between his. There was no need for promises. The fire was warm, the snow outside thick and quiet, and they sat close enough that no part of her felt left out in the cold anymore. The road into town was rutted with ice, the wagon wheels creaking as they hit the frozen grooves. Teagan sat beside Quince beneath a heavy canvas cover, a scarf she'd stitched herself wrapped snug around her neck. Her hands were gloved in old leather that still held the shape of someone else's fingers, but they kept her warm. She rested them on her lap, keeping them still. Quince guided the reins with practiced ease, eyes ahead as the horses trudged forward. They hadn't spoken much since setting out before sunrise, but the silence had an edge to it today, like both of them were turning something over in their minds. "You sure you're up for it?" he asked finally, his voice low beneath the wind. "I've walked through worse with less," she said, not looking at him. "I just need to keep my footing. You'll have mine if yours gives out." She didn't answer that, but her shoulder leaned a little more toward his. The town of Deer Lodge was quiet this time of year, the snow keeping most folks indoors and the storefronts shuttered against the cold. A few men stood outside the livery, smoke from their pipes rising in slow curls. A boy shoveled slush from the steps of the general store, his cap pulled low. Quince tied off the team near the trading post, then stepped down and reached up for her. She hesitated before taking his hand, not because she didn't want to, but because it still startled her how steady it felt. Inside, the store smelled of tobacco and kerosene. Shelves were lined with calico, flour sacks, and tins of molasses. Teagan moved slowly, careful not to knock anything with her skirts. She glanced toward the counter where an older woman in a stiff apron was measuring out sugar. "That's Ruth Elgin," Quince said under his breath. "Don't ask her for credit unless you like being called a fool." "I've had worse things said," Teagan murmured. He handed her a small scrap of folded paper. "These are the things I'd meant to pick up last trip. If you want to walk the aisles, I'll be back with the nails." She took the list and watched him go, then turned toward the shelves. Her fingers grazed over bolts of fabric, jars of pickled carrots, and a small wooden box filled with buttons. She picked up a tin of liniment and checked the label, her breath catching when she saw the price. "Still too dear." A low voice beside her made her turn. "You Vaughn." The man standing there had a half-buttoned coat and a thick beard gone gray at the chin. His eyes weren't unkind, but they watched her too closely. "I am. Saw you working cattle down at Dorset's last spring. You were the one with the red bandana, kept your head down." She nodded once, unsure where this was going. "Heard he turned you out." "That's right." "Damn fool," the man said, shaking his head. "Lost someone who knew how to work through a storm." Teagan didn't know what to say to that. She'd never heard a kind word from anyone under Dorset's roof, let alone a stranger. You staying with Zamora now? She nodded again, slower this time. Well, he said, adjusting his collar, you let him know if he needs help laying rafters. My boy's got a good back and a quiet mouth. I'll tell him. When she found Quince again, he was folding a length of rope into the wagon bed, his expression unreadable. Do you get that often? She asked. What? People offering help once they think someone else has already seen the worth in you. He gave a short breath, not quite a laugh. Sometimes, most just wait to see if you fail first. She held up the paper, got everything but the soap. They were out. He took it from her hand, his thumb brushing her knuckles. We'll make our own, got lye and enough tallow. They rode back in silence, but it felt easier than the ride out. She didn't shift away when their shoulders touched beneath the canvas. That night after supper, she stood by the window, watching the snow drift slow and steady under the moonlight. Quince sat sharpening the drawknife again, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. Will you always stay here? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, setting the blade aside. I built this place to last, but I never figured it'd mean staying still forever. She turned to face him, arms folded. If I asked you to teach me how to build something of my own walls, a roof you think I could, he rose and stepped toward her, the space between them closing with quiet certainty. I think you already are, he said. She didn't look away. I don't want to be someone taken in out of pity. I want to be part of the building. Then you are, he said, close now, his voice steady. You already are. Her hand found his, fingers curling slow and sure. He didn't move to kiss her, not yet, but he didn't need to. The promise stood without it. The fire was low, the snow still falling, and between them there was no more waiting to see if the ground would hold. It already had. The sound of sawing carried through the trees, steady and slow. Teagan stood at the edge of the clearing, her hands dusted with soil, watching Quince cut through a plank balanced across two sawhorses. His jacket hung from a nail on the porch post, his shirt damp across the back from work. She didn't call to him. She just watched for a moment, the smooth rhythm of his arms, the way he paused to check the angle before each cut. Behind her. The garden rows had begun to take shape. The ground was still cold, but she'd turned it with care, laying out lines for potatoes, squash, and beans. She'd spent the morning digging ash into the soil, sleeves rolled past the elbow, breath steady even through the effort. The coughing hadn't returned in days. Quince looked up and caught her eye. He brushed a hand across his forehead and tilted his chin toward the corner of the porch. I made you something? She walked over, brushing dirt from her skirt. On the railing sat a small wooden frame, no larger than a handspan, carved with a delicate edge and sanded smooth. For your stitching, he said. To keep the cloth taut. She turned it over in her hands, thumb tracing the joints. You made this without me asking. You needed one. Teagan nodded slowly. You always know what I need before I do, he shrugged, but his eyes didn't leave hers. I pay attention. She stepped closer. So do I. The air between them held still. Then she leaned in and pressed her lips to his, careful and quiet, the way one might test a door to see if it would open. It did. His arms slipped around her waist, warm and firm, the scent of cedar and sweat rising from his shirt. He didn't pull her in too fast. He waited, letting her choose the distance. She stayed close. When they parted, her voice was no louder than the wind against the porch beams. I've never been with someone who saw the whole of me and didn't flinch. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She believed him. That evening, she lit the lantern while Quince stacked the last of the cut boards near the shed. She moved with ease now, her steps sure, her breath deep and even. Inside, she laid out the table for supper. Not just plates and spoons, but the small jar of wildflowers she'd picked from the edge of the creek, their stems trembling in the light. Quince came in, shaking the sawdust from his sleeves. He glanced at the table, then at her, and something softened in his face. I'm going to register the land in both our names, he said, voice even. Teagan looked up from the bread she was slicing. You don't have to, I want to, he said. Not because you need my name to be safe here. Because this is your home too, and I want that written down somewhere permanent. She set the knife down and crossed to him. Then I'll take your name, she said. And I'll keep it. They married the following week in the chapel outside Deer Lodge. the pastor's wife hemming Teagan's borrowed dress that morning. There were only 4 witnesses, Ruth Elgin among them, her mouth pressed into a line the entire time, but Teagan didn't mind. She stood beside Quince with her hands in his, the warmth of his thumb against her palm, and felt more seen than she ever had before. Afterward, they rode back together in the wagon, her head resting against his shoulder, her fingers tangled in his. Summer came slow but steady. The garden filled out. Teagan built a trellis for peas with her own hands, and Quince added a new shelf for her sewing things near the window. On Sundays, they walked the ridge behind the cabin, following the deer trails where the grass grew soft underfoot. At night, she read aloud from the old Bible, her voice low and calm, while Quince whittled or mended tack. Sometimes they said nothing at all, sitting near the fire with the kind of peace that didn't need filling. One evening in early August, as the sun dipped low and the air turned sweet with pine, he reached across the porch rail and laid a hand on her stomach. "You think we'll be ready?" she smiled, covering his hand with hers. "We already are." Their child, born just after the first frost, had Quince's eyes and Teagan's quiet strength. They named her Clara, after Teagan's mother, and wrapped her in a quilt sewn from scraps of cloth Teagan had saved from the first winter. They raised her in the rhythm they'd made together, steady, honest, and full of care. Quince taught her to ride. Teagan taught her to read. She grew up knowing how to hammer a nail and string beans for drying, how to speak softly but stand firm. Years passed, and the land they'd built their life on held strong. The cabin grew room by room as they needed. The porch stayed the same, wide enough for 2 chairs, a sleeping dog, and on quiet evenings, a pair of hands clasped between them. Teagan never returned to the places that had turned her away. She didn't need to. She had found her place, her name spoken with warmth, her strength matched by someone who never asked her to shrink, and Quince, he never wandered again. He had everything he needed in the woman who had once lain half-broken beneath a bare sky and risen, day by day, into her own. Together they built a life that held, and it held forever.